Well. They let us get to Friday again. That means it's time for another episode of the Leaf Podcast. In leading up to this episode, I didn't have a general idea what I wanted it to be about, but then I got reading about old Irish folk tales, old Welsh folk tales, and I kind of settled on something along the lines of changelings and doppelgangers. And some of these, I think I may have done in a video like years ago, but I don't quite remember because there's so many of them. But some of them are also just kind of really odd. Some are mundane, some are not. And this first one that I have is definitely one of the ones that are not mundane, and ones that are really strange, odd, and even creepy. And for that, we go to the state of Colorado. This guy says it all happened when he was a preteen. He was living out in the middle of nowhere. He said that in his town, everyone knows everyone, and everyone's friends know everyone, and everybody's grandparents know everyone. So he says that at the time, his next door neighbor was a really sweet widow that was kind of slightly older than his parents. Her kids went away to university, so of course, to give her some company, his family would invite her to dinner pretty often because, in a small town, nobody eats alone. And that's essentially the setup for this. He says that one day he was out playing with the neighbor kids. They were just kind of chilling out in the woods, playing hide and seek, playing random games that you play when you're 11 years old. So he says on weekends they're allowed to go to this creek that is kind of a little out of the way, but it's kind of still in the area that they're allowed to play in, but they're kind of testing the boundaries, you know what I mean? We all did that when we were that age. So they're building like this base in the woods, as any guys do when they're about that age. So they say that they arrived at the place where they were making their base, and something stinks really bad there. They saw something in the tall grass surrounding the creek. Now, this is where it gets strange. Their neighbor, the widow, is in the creek, very clearly not alive. In fact, there's signs of animal predation and there's fly larvae crawling all over her. They all turn around and immediately run back to their parents, crying and sobbing. And this is what he says happened next. We run back to our respective parents, crying like little bitches. I run through the door, yelling for my mom, screaming. I run into the living room. Our neighbor is sitting there at the coffee table, sipping tea. She turns her head slowly and looks at me. I turn and back out of the room and go out to Dad's garage. I tell him what happened. He obviously thinks I'm dumb, but he does call the police and tells them that there's a supposed body out in the woods. And then he says that something changed with her. She said that she never wanted to come over anymore, despite not telling her any of this. He said that they would see her sitting on her porch just staring into the distance, which is something that she never did before. Her garden became an absolute mess, and she always looks disheveled. And this is an interesting detail. He said that his parents just say it's depression, but he always knew better. He says that when he got into the living room and saw her, in his shock, he noticed that she was looking back at him with black eyes. So, what do you think about this? Do you think it's a case of a doppelganger, a changeling? Because changelings can take adult humans as well. Do you think it was something else that took her form, because her eyes were all black like that? Or do you think that it was 100% the misunderstanding of some preteen boys? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And the other night when I was going through some really old stories about it, I decided to look up ways, or just odd ways that maybe I could include in a video like this. Odd ways to repel the fae, or repel a changeling or a doppelganger from replacing your baby or your person or whatever. And some of them are more like I can understand, and some of them are very weird. The most common one was to just simply watch the baby at all times, or also just kind of put a circle of iron of some kind. Usually a lot of people back then would use forks and knives because they were cheaper, made of iron. The one I can definitely understand is putting the clothes of the father around the crib or around where the baby is sleeping. I think that this is probably because there's something about human energy or parental energy being around the baby that probably forbids them from doing what they want to do. The one I found kind of weird was that they would put urine around the baby's crib. Now, not only would that repel fae, it probably repels people too. Like, I can't imagine having like company over for dinner or something and having to explain why the house and why the room the baby's in just smells like urine. But also, very different times. So, of course, I wouldn't understand what the reasoning would be for that, because I'm looking at it in hindsight. In fact, there was one story that I found from the early 1700s. That's kind of how far this stuff goes back, and probably even further. But in this particular story, I think it may have been on the Isle of Man, if I remember correctly. A baby that was absolutely beautiful was somehow replaced by a changeling. And in this case, how they figured out it was a changeling was it was acting different than the baby was. That would be the red flag number one. The one after that was they put an instrument next to the baby, and this baby, who could not walk before, picked up the instrument and played like a virtuoso, something that people in that area had never seen someone play like that before. It was also said that this baby, although it wouldn't talk, would furrow its brow and glare at people when they mentioned fae or fairies. And in true older story fashion, how they eventually got their actual child back is pretty crazy. So they took the baby and they put it in the furnace. Allegedly, the baby began to laugh and then went right up the chimney and flew off or something or other. And right after that, when they went chasing after it, they found a fairy mound, and by that fairy mound, they found their actual child. So I cannot imagine having anything close to that chain of events happening to me or anybody I know. To me, that is so bizarre and so off the reserve for me that it's just crazy to think about. Now, did it happen? There's no other corroborating stories, and it's from the early 1700s, but I have a feeling something did happen. So if it wasn't a changeling or a doppelganger, let me know what you think it was down in the comments. And now to keep it moving, here's another story from Europe. This guy says that he is a trucker, and this happened one night when he was driving through the Carpathians. He says it was late at night, absolutely pitch black. The only lights on the road were his headlights. In fact, they were the only thing lighting up the surroundings. He was driving through an area where the nearest person would probably be a good few miles away. He says that he glanced over to the side of the road because it looked like that there was someone standing there. And as soon as he came close enough to see, he was shocked to see himself standing there looking at his truck. At first, he only got a quick glimpse of it, but he sped past. And then something more terrifying happens. It's not just the one time that he sees it. Every time he sees an exact replica of himself standing on the side of the road, and each time it's getting closer and closer to where he's driving by, whereas before it seemed to be in a ditch of some kind. He said he didn't know the English word for it, but I'm assuming it's a ditch or the shoulder of the road. He's still kind of thinking that maybe he's overtired. Maybe something is going on with his brain. He starts to slow down a bit, trying to calm himself down, because he's obviously terrified, and he also doesn't want to panic and crash and have whatever this is, if it's anything, kind of come at him while he can't do anything. Now, this is where he says that after he slowed down, there was a really big tree that was kind of overarching the road, and on the big thick branch, he sees a guy hanging from it by a noose, and it's again himself, but he's smiling. He's holding a sign of some kind, and he has black eyes. He said the sign had something scrawled in Hungarian, which he can't read. And then, right after passing over this branch, he hears a knock against his driver's side window. He doesn't even dare to look. He just speeds away, and eventually, thankfully, gets back to the trucker depot. He begs his boss to never have him take that route again. And then his boss says something kind of bizarre. He says that he's not the first person to ask that question. A few other people recently have said that they don't want to take that route anymore either. And then he says he feels for other truckers who have seen just bizarre and terrifying things on the sides of the road at night. So, as always, what exactly do you think happened here? Because I can't imagine seeing that stuff, especially on the side of the road at night. I have seen my own fair share of weird stuff at night on the road, but usually it involves people on drugs or people just doing weird things at night. Like one time I saw someone skateboarding on the highway, and now he was obviously drunk, so I assumed there was a party hopefully nearby, and that he wasn't just skateboarding into the blackness. But yeah, that was the weird thing recently that I saw. Of course, nothing even close to that. Now, this other one is from Britain. It doesn't exactly say where or how long ago it was. She says that she was babysitting. The kids were regular kids, but the parents were not great people, unfortunately. But they did pay her well to look after them. She said she always felt sorry for the kids, always hoped that they had a better future in front of them than their parents did, or could at least be better people. Now, she also says that this house is pretty big, and it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere on a big chunk of land. And when this happened, it was about 1 a.m. or so. The parents weren't back yet from wherever they were, so she put the kids to bed around 9 p.m. She just had to stay there until they got back. She was playing on her laptop when she heard a knocking at the door to the back. It's a glass double door that goes out to a garden area. When she goes out there to look, at first, there's nothing. She was thinking it must have been the wind or something like that. A few minutes later, she hears it again, and this time, she goes out there to see the daughter that she's looking after, pressed up against the glass, smiling, before backing away from the doors and disappearing into the darkness. She instinctively ran to the door, but just as soon as she reached out for the door handle, she felt chills run up and down her back. She decided that she first better check upstairs to their bedrooms. She opens the door to find the both of them sound asleep in their beds. She then locks all the doors and windows in the house, and she said what scared her the most about it was that when she was going around making sure everything was locked, the only doors that weren't locked were those double glass doors to the garden. And after she did lock them, every few minutes she would hear knocking on those same doors, and then it would change. It would go to a window, it would go to an upstairs window, and then a downstairs door. It just kept cycling like that. She says that she has no idea if it was some kind of crazy prank, but even then, she has no idea how you'd even do that, especially since these kids were only 5 and 6 years old. And then she says, "I thought that the backwoods stuff only happened in America. Guess I was wrong." So reading over that story, it does remind me of something that I heard a long time ago. And for reference, I don't exactly remember when, but here a long time ago could be last week or it could be 7 years ago, 20 years ago. It's hard to say, but I'm kind of gauging more on the 5 to 7 years ago. But that's just me explaining my lingo. So in this case, it was a similar situation. It was a more rural area, but around here, there's a few areas that have mini homes or trailers on them. It's usually like a big plot of land in the middle of the woods, and there's usually 5 or 6 people that will live in that area in their own trailer. Now in this case, all that was going on was they were house sitting for this older woman. I don't remember if it was a grandmother to one of the people that told me or a great aunt or something, but there was some relation. So this woman had went into the city for, I don't know, something, but it was going to be about 2 days before she was going to be back. Which, you know, knowing our healthcare system right now, it could be that she was just in there for a doctor's appointment. But that's besides the point. So it was at night, and I think it was around 10, 12 a.m., well, 10 p.m., 12 a.m. She had friends over, and they were laughing and carrying on and everything, and suddenly they began to hear banging at the door. And not only just banging, there was someone screaming to be let in, like they were angry. It was the older woman who was supposedly an hour or two away in the city. They got thinking, is she back already? That's weird. Not only that, she doesn't have her own car, so who would have dropped her off? So before going outside and seeing what's going on, they look out the window that's closest to this front door. And it's sure enough, is this older woman standing there, but she's wearing her nightdress, and she looks all weird. That's the only description they gave, was that she looked off. And of course, this was the middle of October, so you shouldn't be wearing just a nightdress out there. And as soon as the woman saw them, it ran off into the darkness. Right after this, she decided to call this woman and be like, "Are you back? Are you freaking out? What's going on?" And the woman was her normal, regular, grandmotherly self, just being like, "Oh, I'm having a good time here at the hotel and whatever. And then she says, "But we've seen someone outside who looks like you and is wearing your nightdress." The woman just says to call the police, because I think that she thought the kids were playing a prank on her, didn't really believe them. And her telling them to call the police was more like a deterrent in case they were engaging in underage drinking, which in this case they weren't. They were playing board games. So they decided against it this time. They were thinking, oh, it might be this other old woman down the street and she might be off her meds again, and they were just trying to cope with it, trying to rationalize what happened. And then they begin to hear banging from the crawl space underneath the trailer. This is when two of the girls freak out and they run out of the trailer and back to their cars and just leave, leaving only 3 people left. Now, they looked under the trailer at this point and they couldn't see anybody. Now, the downside is that they don't know the time it took for these people to get out of the house into their cars and then for them to come back and look underneath the trailer. So this time, they did call the police. And they said that what happened next was that they basically locked themselves in the house because they said it would be 25-30 minutes before any police officer would be there. And during this time, that woman could be seen trying to open the door, knocking at the windows, and scratching at the walls. Now, as soon as the police pulled in the driveway, it all just stopped. Apparently, before coming into the house, the police officer went toward the woods. Later on, he said that he saw somebody in their bare feet in a nightdress running off into the darkness, off into the woods. The policeman took their statements, didn't really seem to believe them, but he was kind of sympathetic because they were scared and they were teenagers. So after that, nothing else happened. Morning came, their parents picked them up. They didn't tell their parents about this, and then they just went back home. Now, when the woman came back, she said that it looked like somebody had crawled under her trailer and kind of rummaged around in there. Then she also said it was weird that her porch light was on, especially when it had been turned off, and the only way to turn it on was to be inside. So I don't know what you could consider that, but it really made me think of it the more that I read through these other ones. So, of course, what do you think about all these? Do you think that doppelgangers are real? That changelings are real? Do you think it's the Fae involved? What's going on with them? Of course, there's some people that meet their quote doppelganger and it's like a nice time and they just talk to each other and go their separate ways. But it seems in these cases, the doppelganger or whatever it is has something malicious in play, something malicious in mind. Why do you think that is? And if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please like and subscribe. And as I've been pushing the last couple of weeks, there's a new feature called a hype feature. I don't exactly know how it helps the channel yet, but I noticed that it does. You get 3 free ones a week, I believe. So if you use one of those on me, I would be eternally grateful. And of course, there's memberships and super thanks on YouTube and a PayPal and a Patreon off of YouTube. So with all of that, I hope to see you Sunday. And yeah, thank you for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching/listening, and I'll see you in the next one.